All right, let's kick this off. There's just as far as logistics here, there are going to be some poll questions that you can answer ahead of time. I'm really excited today to talk about how to stay ahead of logistics challenges. We know things have been changing dynamically this year, and also from the end of last year. Rates are at an all-time high. I'm sure there's a lot of pain moving goods from anywhere around the globe. We have two experts here. First, we have Jake, who I've known for many years. He's the VP of Sales and Air and Ocean at Mainfreight Americas. Jake, I'll turn over to you first for an introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Rodney. So Jake Moller, like I said, I'm the Vice President of Sales for Mainfreight Americas. Mainfreight is a company headquartered in Little Auckland, New Zealand, but from a global perspective, we cover 26 countries, 300 plus offices. For the Americas specific, we're doing Canada, United States, Mexico, and a small little outfit in Santiago, Chile. So thanks. Excited to be here.
Thanks, Jake. And now we also have Hana, who's the Senior Logistics Manager at Public Goods. Excited to have you as well.
Thanks, Rodney. For everybody, I'm Hana. I lead logistics at Public Goods. We're a one-stop shop for clean and sustainable essential goods. Our supply chain footprint is mainly domestic, but also in East and South China. So that's really where our insights are going to be. I'm happy to be here and talk about how we positioned ourselves to secure space and to absorb the increasing costs these past few months.
And thank you both ahead of time. For anyone attending, please feel free to ask questions. You can do it in chat. We'll fill those questions. We have some that we're going to front load, but definitely, I'm sure Jake and Hana are here to answer anything you put forward. So the first question, clearly this past year, things have been extremely challenging. Moving goods have been very difficult. What are some of the tools you use for this to facilitate moving goods? I'll kick this off to you first, Hana.
We've done a whole range of things. We've also left a lot of room for experimentation because there really hasn't been a kind of one size fits all approach to dealing with all of the disruptions that have been coming up. We try to take things on a case-by-case basis, on a per item basis. Mainly we've experimented with alternative routes where we've signed on at least 6 providers since the start of the pandemic. So we're growing our network in terms of forwarders and carriers and brokers. We've also worked on internal processes to gain alignment internally as a team. And then we're pouring a lot of money into technology to streamline our systems internally. In most cases, aside from rerouting and building the network and taking it on a case-by-case basis, we've also looked to eating a lot of costs. So we've looked to kind of even air freight or rush some crucial revenue drivers. And in those cases, we've eaten logistics costs just for the sake of business continuity. So we've tried a whole host of things that I'm happy to kind of go into more depth about.
So planning ocean, you moved to air. Have you seen increased costs when you've done that shift?
Absolutely. I mean, in many cases, I think even the rate structure for air has changed as well. Definitely not in our benefit. In terms of ocean, we started monitoring our costs really diligently in October of last year. And personally, we've seen it like around a 250% increase. And I know that spot rates for ocean have gone up by I think 60% just this year. But I also want to make a point that that's just going to be the spot rate. It's just the base rate. It doesn't really include premium fees and get to guarantee space. In most cases, we're paying double what we were paying a year ago. And that's been really, it's had such a negative impact on our bottom line. And we've kind of worked a lot internally to allocate some of our profit margin for specific items to eat that cost.
Very challenging. I'm sure anyone listening and that's part of our brand, they're probably seeing something similar. Jake, you're obviously, a freight forwarder. Your team's working 7 days a week, global footprint. How have things changed for you, both internally and also managing your customers?
Yeah, internally, we've had to be able to scale up pretty quickly, right? I think when COVID first hit, everyone had an idea that we were gonna hemorrhage, we're gonna lose a lot of people, business was gonna downturn, and then very, very quickly into that, we got into a situation where we just had to work 7 days a week, and just to get through it. I think, to Hannah's point, moving stuff from an ocean freight perspective last year is very different to what it is this year. I think, we try to be, from a freight forwarder perspective, very transparent and flexible in our partnerships. So being able to, give different options, for us to give different options to our customers, whether that's FCL, being able to move to an LCL model where you don't have to actually air freight stuff, right? Because air freight, if you looked at it last year, during the peak PPE rush, we were paying $19, $20 a kilo. And that's obviously mitigated a little bit now, but even so, air freight is still going to be 10 extra cost of an LCL shipment. So being able to put different options in front of our customers, and having at least some of your product on the water versus paying air, it has really paid dividends to some of our partners. But I think, again, Hannah said this, having a business continuity plan in place has been an integral part of our customers' strategies and growth and what we're seeing. Just planning for X to happen and then being able to shift to Y very quickly, because who knows when the next, Yantian port is going to shut down because of COVID, or there's another vessel that's going to get stuck in a canal somewhere. It's just being able to pivot. It's been very good for them.
This year hasn't been easy for sure.
No, not at all.
Kind of building upon this, how has visibility changed for you, Jake, like pre-COVID, post-COVID, and what you share with your customers? And then Hannah, I'll turn over what you're seeing with visibility as well, as far as the brand.
Yeah, I think visibility is becoming more and more important. I think just given the current nature of the industry, everyone's carrying very thin inventory levels. So for us, the cost not performing from an ocean freight perspective, air freight perspective, has increased pressure on visibility alone. Knowing more earlier is key in this situation. Holding the likes of forwarders responsible, suppliers more responsible or accountable. For us, it's just having that visibility there all the time. Again, really challenging. Carriers having cyber attacks, getting thrown out of whack, not knowing where stuff is, your POs, if your supplier isn't giving you information where that is, just chasing our tails a little bit. But we're, from a Mainfreight perspective, we're very focused on getting our data integrity and visibility right, and then that filters down to our customers, because at the end of the day, if our customers don't have any idea what's going on in their supply chain, they can't make smart business decisions, and it's going to cost them exponentially more money on the back end.
Are there things you would want to improve here in regards to visibility?
In regards to what exactly? In terms of carrier partnerships, or?
Sure, anything. Maybe how you're providing visibility to a brand, potentially, like with rate increases over time, or visibility where goods are. I'm just curious, are there things that you're actually doing internally around that?
Yeah, we're partnering with like Anvyl, trade data analysis and stuff like that, and just getting an idea of what exactly is going on from a carrier reliability standpoint, how that filters down into our contracts, our the rates, air freight perspective, all that. So it's a conversation we have on a daily basis. And again, for us, we just try to be as transparent as possible with what's going on. Mainfreight has a saying, under promise, over deliver. I think over the last 12 months, 18 months, that's rang really true, because we can't get into a situation where we say, yeah, we can handle all your trans-Pacific ocean freight right now, because the reality is we can't. The carriers are cutting capacities left, right, and center. And for us to get on a vessel, it's going to, $18,000 right now into the West Coast on the spot plus premium. Yeah. So it's been tough.
Yeah, and I could ring. That's true, because I was on the other side. I was with the brand, and Mainfreight did always over deliver for me. So it was very true, and I'm sure that's consistent with today. Hannah, how about you pre-post COVID? How has visibility changed for you, and what would you want improved with logistics?
I think overall, like globally, we're kind of experiencing, I think a lot of the disruption is coming from the lack of infrastructure globally. But I think that also with COVID, once all those disruptions happened, it really shined the light on our lack of our lack of infrastructure internally as well. I mean, we've grown rapidly and we've had to improve our internal infrastructure as well. I mean, I think, Rodney, we started the conversation with Anvyl a year ago, and it was a few months into the pandemic. And that came side by side from a large scale investment into an ERP. Our warehouses, on the warehouse level, our 3PLs have worked to update their WMS software. And these are all major technology upgrades that we would have kicked down the road if it wasn't for all the extreme growth and disruption. I think we said we have to be flexible and account for those costs, but we also need dynamic systems to facilitate and track those changes for visibility and even for cost and transit time analysis in the future. Unfortunately, I think the logistics technology is really lacking in the industry as a whole. So I've opened so many conversations with technology providers. I've even gone on Reddit chains and asked people for help of what they're doing, what kind of standalone TMS software that they have used that doesn't kind of force you to rate shop or book with that company. And I haven't found any really good results. I'm really hoping Anvyl can kind of fill that piece for us. It sounds like they will in the next few weeks. I think the challenge there is just bringing all this data from all these different places. So just overall, we've made a lot of strides in technology, but at the same time, I think with logistics specifically, we're still lacking. I think the industry is still lacking in terms of visibility into logistics, unfortunately.
Great. I'm going to actually build upon this with a question from the audience. Carly asks, and Carly knows a thing or two about logistics, but her question is, how has your ocean freight space procurement strategy changed? So what's changed with you now with ocean in the procurement aspect?
For us, I think it's mainly about buffering, and it's always going to be about timeline and cost for us. So it's always about buffering those in. Internally, we've kind of worked to always give each other pass along information. Specifically with procurement, I think I could speak to building our network out. And like I mentioned, we signed on to 6 new providers. And I think that was because, on to Jake's point, is that we were also going to some of our previous providers and we were getting refused. They'd say, we'll quote this out for you, but we actually do not want to handle this for you and we won't handle this for you. So we've had to look and widen our network and our different lanes and see which ones are most important to us, so we could get a range of quotes and kind of solutions available to us. Otherwise, like we said, I mean, some carriers just will not move your freight from certain lanes anymore, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I'm gonna, Jake, actually turn that over to you as well. When your customers are booking ocean, are there best practices now that you're sharing about maybe when to give you a heads up or how to do it? Have things changed post-COVID?
Post-COVID, yeah. I mean, we looked like in March last year, February last year, you could get on a vessel within a week's period and 2-week period. Now, getting on a vessel from Asia, just on the west into the West Coast, is going to be a 4 to 6 week booking window. So being able to forecast and forecast accurately well in advance is just going to position you much better going forward. To build on Hana a little bit, the procurement strategy from a forwarder side has changed exponentially as well. During COVID, I think it was pretty much status quo. Rates were increasing up through the summer of last year. Then the premiums, started to hit once the Chinese Ministry of the Maritime Commission, whatever they're called over there, started putting caps on the FAK market. Then the premiums started coming into effect, right? So that leading up into the historical contract season in March, April of this year, we really didn't know what was going to happen. And unfortunately for some of our customers, customers globally, the Suez is happening right as that kicked off. And we were signing deals, just for context, into the West Coast out of China-based ports in the low 3s. And then carriers came to us and said, sorry, we can't honor that anymore. Your MQCs have been cut by 50 to 70%. So now if you want to get on a vessel, it's going to exponentially, be more expensive, and those premiums are going to come into play. So for us, it's been a challenge to get, again, it's really, I feel like my job in the last 3 months has just been, apologizing to customers and and trying to mitigate their loss as well. It's been tough for sure.
Yeah, it's a complete waterfall effect. And I think a
Yep.
lot of people don't realize that. And it's tough because you want to blame your carrier, right? Like Mainfreight, right? For
Yep.
rate increases, or for the windows that are increasing for, when to actually book freight. But really it's going down even further. So I think a lot of people don't realize that. And I'm glad you kind of highlighted that, Jake.
Yeah, and again, the Suez really, that ripple effect, customers sometimes don't realize is, there was, I think it was up to a point of 300 vessels moored up on either side of the Suez. And then once that was released, it was only a week, right? Once that was let go, all the containers had to get into Europe, get delivered to the customers, get back on vessels, go back through the Suez to Asia. So you had this ripple effect or downstream effect of blank sailings. And there was probably between 50 and 60 blank sailings announced through this quarter. Not because the carriers were trying to make more money and play the market a bit. They literally had no containers to load on vessels because they weren't there.
Yeah.
So it's just this, unfortunately, this purgatory of bad news that we're living in. But again, for us, just being as transparent as we possibly can with where the rates are sitting, where the capacity is sitting, and for our customers to be as flexible as possible and shifting different port pairings. For the Yantian situation last couple of weeks, not moving out Yantian, okay, we can get into Hong Kong, Nansha, Shekou, truck up to Xiamen. Just really being flexible in that has proven to be at least some success or at least a release valve for our customers.
Yeah.
Can I jump on that really quick? Sorry.
Yeah. Please do.
Because everything you're saying, Jake, is exactly what we're seeing from the customer side. We absolutely do not blame our carriers or forwarders because we know what the reality is like. But I think we spoke about this earlier about the Suez Canal, and we initially let out a sigh of relief because we don't ship through the canal, and we rarely, even pretty infrequently, from the Mediterranean as a whole. But there was such a ripple effect of that event, and 2 weeks later we had cancellations on 3 of our containers leaving from India because that vessel is now repurposed to deal with the congestion and container needs in a completely different part of the world. And we were kind of SLO and had to kind of go back to the drawing board right before that was about to sail. In terms of Yantian as well, that kind of the recent disruptions there, one of the busiest port in the world, that I think had a surge of 45% from over the last year. We just recently had to reroute, I think, 4 to 6 containers from Shenzhen to Shanghai. And that's 1,000-mile distance that we now need to start accounting for in terms of timeline, in terms of cost, in terms of just our network there. So I completely echo that the need for customers to be, and shippers to be, flexible and not to blame your forwarders and carriers because it's completely out of their control.
Thank you.
But having a good network of people that you trust and know that are trying to be creative on your behalf, I think, is paramount.
What we see is some customers, when they typically ship from China into LA, they've actually gone all the way around to Newark. And that kind of doesn't logically make sense, but it actually did because they saved on cost and it was actually faster, crazy enough. And I don't know, Jake, you don't need to build upon that, but I'm sure you're seeing some crazy things happening right now, and you're probably recommending things to improve upon what's happening logistically.
Yeah, again, it's a flexibility factor. Carriers, especially the CIF carriers, are pulling out of the inland IPI contract as well. So when I say IPI, all the Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas Cities of the world. So if you have your DCs in inland, the carriers want the containers to get turned around as fast as possible back to Asia because they're clipping $15,000, $10,000 a box versus an export back to Asia is maybe $2,000 right now. So they just want to get that equipment back as quickly as possible.
Yeah, this is leading into a question from the audience that I'm sure it's going to build upon this and will help provide some clarity. What's being asked is they've seen that even after bookings, advance payments, etc., they're changing shipment priorities due to flight restrictions. So this was obviously via air. The question is, do you experience anything like this? If yes, how did you cope with this? and this is obviously directed to you, Hannah, but Jake, I'm sure you can give perspective around like that as well. Like once things are booked and things adjust, why would that actually happen? I'm sure that'd be helpful to answer.
Yeah, I think from a technical or operational standpoint, with air freight, given the scope of COVID and the flights being pulled out and put in on a daily basis, if you're paying for something in advance, you have that space locked in, and then all of a sudden there's a pilot that gets COVID or is stuck in a different country, and that flight can't move. Unfortunately, your freight's not going to move, and then again, that causes a downstream effect of backlog at that port of exit for upwards of a week or so. So it does happen on a daily basis. I think when you're talking to your forwarder partner or carrier, if you have a contract directly, just having that plan in place as a backup if you need to pull freight out of a certain terminal and move it to another one, just make sure you have that contingency plan in place.
And that's actually one of our questions about contingency planning. So that's a good one. Hannah, are you seeing this? You book something, air, and then it's pulled and changed?
Absolutely. And we've already kind of locked in a price that where we've paid almost double what we normally would have paid to guarantee that space. But I mean, Jake, you brought up a good point. Some people are just getting COVID. Some people in our like global supply chain infrastructure are getting COVID. Ports, people are just getting COVID. I think was the port of Long Beach around Chinese New Year, where they had a COVID outbreak at the port. So they were unable to unload. So I think it's hard to, we use the word forecasting, and I'm like, I've found it impossible to look ahead because how do you plan for that? Unfortunately, when it comes to contingency planning, I really think it really comes down to building that network. And like Jake said, having a plan B, not just having a plan B of where you're going to go and reroute that shipment, but also what other forwarders could you reach out to, or carriers that you could reach out to in the area who could take this on and kind of repurpose your shipment and kind of make use of their space. I think it's ideally you want to take a bird's eye view and understand your lanes that you're most reliant on, and building out that network in those lanes, as well as getting a plan B and plan C together just in case something cancels, just in case somebody gets COVID.
Yeah, I don't know who asked that question, but again, from a technical standpoint, I would reach out to your forwarders and ask about their BSAs or their sub BSAs and how that's contractually set up, and which airlines. So you're not using code sharing options coming out of Asia. So you're hedging your bets a little bit there.
Good best practice. With the contingency planning aspect, I think a lot of people do not see that like outside of like just immediately what's an issue. So really you need to know end-to-end supply chain. So if you don't know lead times for manufacturing, how many tools you have running, if you can pull that in, if you can adjust things even within the factory, it's really hard to do that logistically. So like you were just mentioning, Jake, like the window is, instead of like 2 weeks, it's now 4 to 6 weeks. So if you can't produce fast enough to get into these earlier windows, you're constantly going to be behind. So I'd recommend with contingency planning, just don't look at what you're trying to solve for the total complex supply chain. Just to jump into there. There's another question here. I guess this is like potentially, Jake, if you're going to look at the future a little bit, which I know is probably hard, and I'm sure you have a whole team trying to look through this, like analysts, data scientists. But if you looked at the future a little bit, how do you see the delays and bottlenecks from Asia Pacific to North America, Europe, Middle East, and do you have any projections of when this will smooth out, and what can be the right steps to deal with it? So first question is, when do you think it's going to improve? When is it going to get better?
Yeah, my crystal ball.
You're getting put on the spot here, and this is
I should probably play the lottery at the same time if I get this right. It's a good question, and it's a question that our customers ask us every day. We are cautiously optimistic that with the blank sailings easing through this quarter, so starting next month, middle of July, we're hoping that if you're paying a premium on an ocean freight container, that it'll actually get loaded. So to a similar situation we were in December, January, February, earlier this year. We have gone out and done surveys, talked to our customers, and when they have an expectation from their supply chain and when this may ease, one of our bigger customers in the Midwest says they expect disruption through to the next 3 years. Us in the speaking to carriers on a weekly basis directly, they're telling us summer next year is when they expect things to ease up a bit. So I think from a planning perspective, at least through the end of this year, be prepared to pay for premiums to get your freight away. But again, we hope that with the blank sailings easing through the next couple months, next quarter, that we should put ourselves in a good position to hopefully mitigate some of these costs and delays.
Sure, that's helpful. Everyone's trying to
Don't
plan.
record me. I know you're recording me, but don't play that somewhere in 6 months' time.
We will. We'll bring it up, and we'll see. Maybe you're going to be right, and you want it to be brought up.
Yeah.
Speaking of this, about projecting the future, obviously there's just tons of data across every aspect, lead times, costs. How are the two of you using data to overcome these challenges?
So we actually just started looking at our data to do some analysis, a retroactive analysis of how things have gone over the past year. The problem that I mentioned before with technology is that it's very difficult for us to bring all these different modes and these different providers all into one platform and to do that data in one system. So we've unfortunately had to look at some offline options for consolidating all that information manually. I think when you start to upgrade your technology to ERPs, I think we're in a place now where we're starting to formalize data collection, and we're just starting to look at analysis right now. So unfortunately, I don't have the best window into that because we're still working on it as well. If you work with one freight forwarder, I'm sure it'd probably be very easy to kind of pull all your numbers from there. So I'll throw it to Jake.
Yeah, I think in terms of data integrity, it's, how can you improve on something that you don't measure? So for us, we like to give as much data points as we possibly can to our customers to have that educated decision. I think our industry as a whole is in the Stone Age compared to others. We're slowly, coming to the forefront of that, but it's a laborious process. You're trying to change stuff that's been around for 50, 60 years from a data point. So Mainfreight specifically is looking at different ways of, different milestones, data points, and more importantly, the integrity behind that and getting right information to our customers. I think for us, knowledge is power, right? And it's that simple. And if using data integrity analysis to get to a point where we can give that information to our customers and have it be predictive into the future is the ultimate goal for us.
Yeah, and to build upon this, and maybe it is being predictive and using data to drive better decisions. What are you seeing on Mainfreight? What are you doing to empower your customers to deal with these challenges?
Specific to data integrity or just in general?
Just in general right now, costs are at all-time high. Routes are taking, exceptionally long, even to book and to pick up and even deliver. What do you do? Are there things you're doing differently or looking at doing differently or that your customers could be aware of? Yeah,
so again, I sound like a broken record, but we're encouraging our customers to be as flexible as possible. As an example for us, we've implemented fairly recently something called a multi-country consolidation program. And what that means is we're taking shipments from the likes of Korea, Taiwan, different base ports in China, consolidating into Hong Kong, and then bringing that into the United States to different ports. And the reason we're doing that is because historically you just ship direct, right? It's an FCL out of Busan into LA, fairly straightforward. If you can't get space on that, we can take, your core product inventory, maybe that's only 6 cubic meters. The transit time from Korea into Hong Kong is say 2 to 3 days. We can consolidate that in a week and a half, and actually get that freight out quicker than if you're waiting for a booking to be released directly in a full load. So implementing stuff like that, and the way that is different is historically that would never work, right? Because you can just get that freight out immediately within a 2-week period. That coupled with a sea air option as well, it's very similar. You take it out of Shanghai, put it on a feeder vessel into Hong Kong, and then you can air freight out of Hong Kong or whatever that base port is into the US. And just being again, flexible in how you can, the costs associated to both of those.
It's a good hack for sure. And it's good for people to understand that, like what's happening to actually adjust with the market and how that's changing. Hannah, I'll go to you for this. I'm sure everyone's very well aware of this and probably a major question for them, but how have costs changed with your logistics moves for inbound goods?
What was the question? How have costs changed?
Yeah, how's your costs changed? And are there things you're doing to minimize those costs?
I think now unfortunately, there has to be a willingness to pay for space. And I think that's going to last through, like Jake said, at least another year. So I think that's something to just generally be prepared for. What we did is look on a per item basis and analyzed how much of our profit margin we were willing to give up and making determinations based on that. In some cases, we were like, we'll give up 5% for this item. In other cases, double that. I think in some cases, we've also looked at, sometimes it just isn't feasible when we're spending double what the cost of manufacturing to ship a product. And we're now even just thinking about, is this a viable product for us? Another topic that I think is becoming a little bit trendy these days is talking about onshoring, because if it is costing us $1 to $3 to ship per unit to ship something from China, then maybe it does make sense to start manufacturing that in the US. So again, I think looking at your products on a per item basis and how much of your margin you're willing to give up for logistics, as well as just even kind of taking a bird's eye view of your product line to see if it even makes business sense anymore.
Hey, Hannah, question for you. Have you had to push forward increases on your product to your customers?
Yes, so we're just starting to do that today. I just got out of a meeting earlier today where we looked at a lot of our, at least 10 items, mainly in the food category and other maybe componentry as well, where again, we found that the cost to ship was double, if not the same price to manufacture, sometimes double. And now we're gonna start passing that, we're gonna start instituting some price increases on our members, unfortunately. And I think it's not just us. We are hearing this from our investors. We're hearing this from other companies. And I think the latter part of this year, we're going to see as consumers, a lot of our product prices for essential commodities go up. So yeah, absolutely. We're going to start doing that.
Yeah, our customers, when we talk to, are saying the same. They've tried to ride the wave out, so to say, pun intended, for the last 12 months or so, but they're getting to a point where unfortunately it's not sustainable. Customers, historically, the commercial value of their container for 40-foot was say $11,000, $12,000. You're paying 15. It's it's a no-brainer, unfortunately.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think also when you're looking at price increases as well, I think that, like, again, going back to what I was saying, is kind of pointing to even starting to resource your products, looking for different alternative suppliers in lanes that are a little bit more stable. But again, finding a way to kind of eat that cost or even passing that on to the consumer, I think, is the next steps, unfortunately.
Yeah, when you have low margin items, I mean, that increase is substantial. It's hard to continue to be a business if rates continue to go up. So I'm mindful there's drastic measures. I'm sure last that any brand wants to do is increase costs for their customers, but little you can do at times. For the audience, we're going to be wrapping up here in a minute. If you have a question, please ask it. We'll definitely fill those. So I don't want to miss out on anyone. Great questions so far, and looking forward to seeing some more here. Going through this, and this is very broad, and Hannah, I'll go with you first, but how are you dealing with these events that are completely out of your control? What are some of the things you're doing to measure and really take control or navigate through this?
I can't speak, I can't say more, I can't speak highly, I don't even know what the verbiage is, but like the people that we work with and our internal processes is really what's getting us through this. Having strong relationships with our providers and our people on the ground, I think has been crucial. And then also instituting a lot of internal checks and balances for our team has been crucial. Previously, you know, our team wasn't, in most businesses, people are not really dealing with the logistics that much. They don't really care. And now we're kind of we're at the focal point of everything that's happening. Even like we were saying, when it comes to price, we started instituting weekly check-ins with our providers to look at different shipments and to try to be flexible and creative when it comes to disruptions. We plan monthly meetings with our providers and our internal team to kind of lead a State of the Union address for the month, just to discuss what's happening in terms of cost and timeline. So again, I think building your infrastructure, building out your team and the processes that you're using internally to be able to kind of look ahead and mitigate a lot of the disruptions that are happening is really what's got us through, people and process.
Yeah, so to quickly add on that, I think dealing with events outside of your control from a planning perspective, it may just be, you know, consider thinking about the worst possible disruption to your business or in the supply chain facet and plan around that. And, you know, hopefully that never happens, but having that plan in place it could benefit you going forward.
Yeah. This is building upon this, Jake, and this is probably directed to you from the audience. With like issues in ocean, with the bottlenecks there, are there ways to mitigate that with purely ocean movements? You're kind of mentioning how you're consolidating at different locations, but any solutions to mitigate that you can think of for a brand that's, you know, shipping from maybe China into the US, or, you know, Europe into the US, or US to Europe, et cetera? What would you recommend? Is there something that could actually be done nowadays to fix that?
Yeah, historically, if you're going into heavy volumes into the Midwest, there's something called interdom service you can utilize, and that's taking containers off the port and putting them directly onto rail. What you're finding now is the congestion here in the West Coast from a rail perspective is just as bad as a congestion of trying to get on a vessel in China or in Europe, wherever it's coming from. My suggestion to that would be getting into a port, whether that be New York, LA, Oakland, wherever it be, and to mitigate delays, transload that freight and get it onto a truck. Now, of course, it's a bit of another issue from a domestic transport perspective, because that imbalance right now, you have an 85% to 15% trade imbalance on domestic trucking, right? 85 going out from the West Coast, 15% coming in. So there is a bit of a challenge around that, but making sure you pick partners that have that full scope network that could support you, bringing that container into a CFS or warehouse, deconsolidating and utilizing them, or whoever into the Midwest.
Yeah.
Rail is just, again, I mentioned a little bit earlier, carriers are pulling out of moving containers inland right now. They don't see the need for it because they can make 10x the amount on an import from China than an export going somewhere else.
Yeah.
I can speak to that a little bit as well. I think at the beginning we used to, both of our DCs are kind of on opposite ends of the country. So we used to utilize rail a lot prior to this, maybe 2 years ago. And we kind of completely pulled out of rail because we just didn't see that there were cost savings or you know, timeline improvements there. Transloading, I think, is really important, but I think when you're it's not just the ocean and port delays. I think once a container gets here, there's a number of delays that we've seen over the past few months. I mean, with all the equipment shortages and even labor shortages at the port, we've started to add in a couple $100 buffer for, let's call it a domestic disruption fee, where carriers are charging us for delays at the port, for unloading the container, for even just storage charges, because we can't get a driver to make an appointment to pick it up or to drop off the empty, for example. We just had another scenario where we had to do that as well. So I think not necessarily pointing to solution, but just always keeping in mind that it's not just what's happening globally, but once the container gets here, there are a host of other delays and cost increases once it lands at the port.
Yeah, actually a question was about this. Chandler is saying that they're part of the goods, they're stuck in Shanghai and they've been there for 2 months. I'm assuming in customs. If I'm wrong, let me know. But they've been stuck in Shanghai. And Jake, is there something like can be done when things are stuck somewhere? And it's like you literally only can do something like ocean movement because maybe these goods are too large. Like, here you can't air freight it. Could be, who knows, like something about capital equipment or something for a factory.
Yeah, without knowing the context and the profile of the freight, weight stims, all that stuff, I would say see if you can do LCL, which is taking up a portion of a container to move out. LCL contracts from a carrier perspective are prioritized over standard FCL rates. And the reason they do that is because a carrier or freight forwarder doesn't want, if they have to roll a container of an FCL, it's one customer. If they have to roll a consolidation container, it's 20 customers, right? So the way that, all forwarders structure their contracts is that the FAK consolidations are always prioritized. So if it's too large to air freight, it's been stuck because you can't get it into a 20-foot or a 40-foot, try to use LCL. If you can move it from a different port, you can look at utilizing a Ningbo or Xiamen, Dalian. Again, without the context, it's tough for me to give a definitive answer.
I can add that as well. In the case of India, when we had to cancel those 3 containers, we had to move something, and we were able to utilize LCL to get some of those like pallets shipped. I think it took us between 1 to 2 weeks, which is just far exceeds the timeline that we're looking at to get that container rebooked. So I completely echo that. I think LCL is a great option if things are urgent, and you'll probably be able to guarantee some space pretty quickly.
I think it's about having critical inventory on the water, and shifting from an FCL to an LCL model. It is difficult right now because we have some co-loaders, carriers putting 10 cubic meter maxes per box on it. But I think once you ramp up, and that may take 4 to 5 weeks, you consistently have freight coming in every week going forward after that ramp up period.
That's actually really good for people to know. It's like 2 things. If you're stuck in one port, you could potentially truck that to another port to get out faster. A lot of people just inherently think about that. You think once you get to the port, we're good, but maybe not the case. And then FCL to LCL, it's really good feedback. And it seems like both of you have seen that. This is one very pointed question. Are costs increasing because purely supply and demand, or is there some other factor around that?
Yeah, I think we'd be naive to think that the carriers aren't taking advantage of the situation that's being put in front of them. I think the tough position for forwarders is that they're the middleman, right? And we have to do our best to mitigate cost increases to our customers. If you look at the financial results of the carriers over the last, call it 10, 15 years, a lot of them are state run. They're going through a consolidation where, they're going out of business or being consolidated with other ones. If you look at O&E right now, that's 3 Korean carriers into one. And China Shipping was bought up by Costco, so on. They were doing that to mitigate shutting down. Right now, and I think the first quarter for CMA, they posted a $3.5 billion result, which is more money than they made over the last 10 years. So, can we blame them from profiteering? Yes, probably to a certain extent. But unfortunately, what can we do to stop them from making money? Our government's getting involved. Yes, probably a little bit too slowly, depending on who you ask. I know from the United States perspective, the FMC is finally looking into detention and demurrage cases, specifically focused around the West Coast. But that's really the beginning of it. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered the question particularly, but
I think it did pretty directly. Also, a lot of these companies are publicly traded companies, so you can imagine you can look at that and just see the impacts of what's happening with that. If you just want to look at the company, you can look at their earnings and everything else. Just answer that question for someone else. So they're disclosing everything. This is kind of going back to contingency planning a little bit, and this will be our last question here. How are you managing to build resilience and the costs associated with this concept? I think I looked at that. I think I said that correctly, but how are you building in resilience in, I guess, right now, just in general? It kind of goes back to contingency. I could recap that if that'd be helpful, but Hannah, you're shaking your head. I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's been a costly process to be resilient. And in most, looking at our business as a whole, we're actually holding 2 months more inventory than we initially planned for this year. And that's just because we found that stock outages just had such an incredible negative impact on not just our revenue, but our customer acquisition. So holding more inventory, it was helping us be more resilient to a lot of those changing delays and changing disruptions on the global market. So holding more, I think, is important. I mean, it depends on what your business really looks like. In terms of resilience, I also think that going back to what Jake said about booking a month in advance, I think although I said, things are going to come up that are unforeseen and unprecedented challenges, but I think looking as far ahead in advance and planning, having a plan A and plan B in effect for a couple of months down the line. I mean, we're even really talking about the holiday season right now and Chinese New Year as well. And it's just the end of Q2. So looking ahead, I think is going to be really important, but also having a plan B for when really, unforeseen disruptions happen.
Anything to build, Jake, on that? No, I think Hannah brings a good point. If you look at what's happening right now, you're talking about holiday season. We've been in this proverbial peak for 12 months, 6 to 12 months at this point. We do have an early Chinese New Year. And to keep in the back of your minds, just to add on top of all that, the ILW, which is the Longshoremen's Union here in the West Coast, their contract's up next summer. So they're going to see the amount of money that the terminals and the carriers are making. So we expect them to start positioning themselves in fall this year with some disruptions. What that looks like to be determined, but that's all going to play into factors of just this trade and what's going to happen on the Trans-Pacific. And then the East Coast ILW will start the year after. I think Hannah, what you guys did was really smart. Onboarding new forwarders, partners, trusted ones at that. It makes sense. I think it pains me to say this, but the reality is you need to have as many partners as you can to get your freight away. Gone are the days now where you can rely on a Mainfreight, one person to move everything, just because of all the capacity that's being cut in the market. It's near on impossible for anyone. So spreading the wealth a little bit, figuring out who's a good partner, a fit culturally. If you like them, get along with them. They can move your freight. They're transparent. And then when the market softens a bit, try to consolidate again. I think that's what we're seeing in the market right now. Yeah.
What I always think about is if you're early, you're never late. So if you need to get products for the holidays, get them out as early as possible, because the holiday rush, Chinese New Year, everything you're saying is not going to help you. It's going to get worse. So again, my only recommendation, if you can at all, start shipping right now for holiday.
Absolutely, could not agree more. Like if you have any seasonal products, or you're looking to, increase your revenue in the holiday season, which I'm sure everyone is, please be shipping right now, or at least booking your shipments for the next couple of months.
Jake, Hannah, this was amazing. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everyone who attended. Great pieces of wisdom here. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to forward any questions back to Jake or Hannah, but really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.